present here. Today, I'm Pratika on behalf of Shannon's Public School is going to conduct in-house training on the topic setting outcomes in teaching learning method. Before starting, we must clear it. What are students' learning outcomes? Learning outcomes are statements of the knowledge, skills, and abilities individual students should possess and can demonstrate upon completion of a learning experience or sequence of learning experiences. Before preparing a list of learning outcomes, consider the following recommendations. Number one, learning outcomes should be specific and well defined. When developing a list of student learning outcomes, it is important that statements be specific and well defined. Outcomes should explain in clear and concise terms the specific skills students should be able to demonstrate, produce, and know as a result of program's curriculum. They should also exclude the greatest number of possible alternatives so that they can be measured. For example, the learning outcome students completing the BS in chemistry should be well practiced in the relevant skills of the field is too well. In this example, we do not know what the relevant skills of the field of chemistry include. This will create problems in measuring the behavior of interest and drawing valid conclusions about the program's success. Recommendation number 2 is learning outcomes should be realistic. It is important to make sure that outcomes are attainable. Outcomes need to be reviewed in light of students' ability, developmental levels, their initial skill sets, and the time available to attain these skill sets. That is 4 years. They should also be in line with what is being taught. Next recommendation that we must take care of, learning outcomes should rely on active verbs in the future tense. It is important that outcomes be stated in the future tense in terms of what a student should be able to do as a result of instruction. For example, the learning outcome students have demonstrated proficiency in is stated in terms of the students' actual performance instead of what they will be able to accomplish on completion of the program. Learning outcomes should also be active and observable so that they can be measured. For example, outcomes like students will develop an appreciation of and will be exposed to are latent terms, hidden terms that will be difficult to quantify. What does it mean to have an appreciation for something or to be exposed to something? Then, next recommendation, learning outcomes should be framed in terms of the program instead of specific cases or classes that the program offers. Learning outcomes should address program goals and not specific course goals, since assessment at the school is program focused. For example, the learning outcome, the students completing basic mathematics should be able to. This focus at the course level. It does not describe what a student in mathematics should be able to calculate as a result of the program. There should be sufficient number of learning outcomes. You should include between 3 to 5 learning outcomes in your assessment plan. Fewer than 3 will not give you adequate information to make improvements. More than 5 may be too complicated to assess. It is important to note that not all programs will assess all learning programs or all learning outcomes in all classes. It does not describe what a school student in mathematics should be able to demonstrate as a result of the program. Then, there should be a sufficient number of learning outcomes. You should include between 3 to 5 learning outcomes in your assessment plan. Fewer than 3 will not give you adequate information to make improvements. More than 5 may be too complicated to assess. It is important to know that not all programs will assess all learning outcomes in all classes. The program may choose to focus on 1 or 2 per class. Next recommendation that must be taken care of, that learning outcomes should align with the program's curriculum. The outcomes developed in your plan need to be consistent with the curriculum goals of the program in which they are taught. This is critical in the interpretation of your assessment results in terms of where changes in instruction should be made. Using curriculum mapping is one way to ensure that learning outcomes align with the curriculum. A curriculum map is a matrix in which learning outcomes are plotted against specific program courses. Learning outcomes are listed in the rows and courses in the columns. This matrix will help clarify the relationship between what you are assessing at the program level and what you are teaching in your courses. Learning outcomes should be simple, not compound. The outcomes stated in your plan should be clear and simple. Avoid the use of bundled or compound statements that triangle elements of 2 or more outcomes into one statement. For example, the outcome students completing mathematics in the 10th should be able to analyze and interpret data to produce meaningful conclusions and recommendations, and explain stats in writing is a bundled statement. This outcome really addresses 2 separate goals, one about analyzing and interpreting data and another about writing. Learning outcomes should focus on learning products, not the learning process. Learning outcomes should be stated in terms of expected student performance and not on what faculty intend to do during instruction. The focus should be on the students and what they should be able to demonstrate or produce upon completion of the program. For example, the learning outcome introduces mathematical applications is not appropriate because its focus is on instruction, that is, the process, and not on the results of instruction, that is, the product. Here, the student learning experience, it will be the process, and learning outcome, that is the product. Now, constructing learning outcomes. Considering taxonomies. Taxonomies of educational objectives can be consulted as useful guides for developing a comprehensive list of student outcomes. Taxonomies attempt to identify and classify all different types of learning. Their structure usually attempts to divide learning into the types of domains: cognitive, affective, and behavioral, and then defines a level of performance for each domain. Cognitive outcomes describe what the students should know. Affective outcomes describe what the students should think. Behavioral outcomes describe what a student should be able to perform or do. Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives is one traditional framework for structuring learning outcomes. Levels of performance for Bloom's cognitive domain include knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. These categories are arranged in ascending order of cognitive complexity, where evaluation represents the highest level. The table that I am going to describe now presents a description of the levels of performance for Bloom's cognitive domain. First level is knowledge at the bottom, and its description is to know and remember specific facts, terms, concepts, principles or theories. Then comprehension, to understand, interpret, compare, contrast, as well as explain. Application, that is the third level from bottom, and it is used to describe, to apply knowledge to new situations, to solve problems using required knowledge or skills. After that, the next level is analysis, to identify the organizational structure of something, to identify parts, relationships, and organizing principles. Then synthesis, to create something, to integrate ideas into a solution, to propose an action plan, to formulate a new classification scheme. And at the top is evaluation, to judge the quality of something based on its adequacy, value, logic, or use. Using power verbs. When composing learning outcomes, it is important to rely on concentrate or concrete action, verbs that specify a terminal, observable, and successful performance, as opposed to passive verbs that are not observable. For example, the statements "be exposed to," "be familiar of are not observable and would be difficult to quantify. The table below provides a list of common active verbs for each of Bloom's performance levels. See here. Under the knowledge category, define, identify, indicate, know, label, list, memorize, name, recall, record, relate, duplicate, select, underline, tell, translate, sketch, read and use. Then under comprehension, classify, describe, discuss, explain, express, identify, locate, paraphrase, recognize, report, restate, review, suggest, summarize, translate, cite, question, distinguish, solve. Then under application, apply, compute, construct, demonstrate, dramatize, employ, give examples, illustrate, interpret, investigate, operate, organize, practice, predict, inspect, inventory, articulate, assess and collect. Under the category of analysis, analyze, appraise, calculate, categorize, compare, contrast, criticize, debate, determine, diagram, differentiate, distinguish, examine, experiment, propose, set up, solve, infer and test. Now, second last category is synthesis in this order, and here arrange, assemble, collect, compose, construct, create, design, formulate, manage, organize, perform, plan, prepare, produce, select, value, module, perform and integrate. Evaluation, appraise, assess, choose, compare, contrast, decide, estimate, evaluate, grade, judge, measure, rate, revise, score, argue, critique, defend. Other sources of learning outcomes are, when creating learning outcomes, it may also be helpful to consult professional organizations, similar programs at other universities, methods books, peer institutions, websites, or banks of learning outcomes online. It is also useful to develop ideas for student learning outcomes based on what students have accomplished in previous semesters or previous classes. Then, here are some sample learning outcomes. Languages and literature. The students will be able to apply critical terms and methodology in completing a literary analysis following the conventions of standard written English or any other language. The students will be able to locate, apply, and cite effective secondary materials in their own text. The students will be able to analyze and interpret text within the context they are written. French students will be able to demonstrate oral competence with suitable accuracy in pronunciation, vocabulary, as well as language fluency. French students will be able to produce written work that is substantive, organized, and grammatically accurate. French students will be able to accurately read and translate text. Then, humanities and fine arts. The students will be able to demonstrate fluency with formal vocabulary, artistic techniques, and procedures of two-dimensional and three-dimensional art practice. Students will demonstrate in-depth knowledge of artistic periods used to interpret works of art, including historical, social, and philosophical contexts. Students will be able to critique and analyze works of art and visual objects. Students will be able to identify musical elements, take them down at dictation, and perform them at sight. Students will be able to communicate both orally and verbally about music of all genres and styles in a clear and articulate manner. Students will be able to perform a variety of memorized songs for a standard of at least 2 foreign languages. Then, the students will be able to apply performance soon in the analysis and evaluation of performances and text. The students will be able to analyze and interpret scripts. The students will demonstrate in-depth knowledge and understanding of contemporary theatre forms and artists. And also, students will be able to demonstrate proficiency in a variety of dance styles, including ballet, modern dance, jazz, and tap. Physical and biological sciences. Here, students will be able to demonstrate an understanding of core knowledge in biochemistry and molecular biology. The students will be able to apply critical thinking and analytical skills to solve scientific data sets. The students will be able to apply the scientific method to solve problems. Students will be able to demonstrate written and or oral presentation skills to communicate scientific knowledge. Students will be able to acquire and synthesize scientific information from a variety of sources. Students will be able to apply techniques and instrumentation to solve problems. In case of maths, students will be able to translate problems for treatment within a symbolic system. Students will be able to articulate the rules that govern a symbolic system. Students will be able to apply algorithmic techniques to solve problems and obtain varied solutions. Students will be able to judge the reasonableness of obtained solutions. Social sciences. Students will be able to write clearly and persuasively to communicate their scientific ideas clearly. The students will be able to test hypotheses and draw correct inferences using quantitative analysis. The students will be able to evaluate theory and critic research within the discipline. In terms of business, the students will be able to work in groups and be part of an effective team. The students will be able to communicate business knowledge, both orally and written. The students will be able to recognize and respond appropriately to an ethical and regularly dilemma. The students will be able to recognize and diagnose accounting problems. The students will demonstrate disciplinary competence in the field of business. Now, using a curriculum map. After you have developed the learning outcomes for your program, you should use a curriculum map to see how the outcomes you have developed are met in each course in the program. A curriculum map is simply a matrix in which you list each learning outcome in the rows and the program courses in the columns to indicate which courses contribute to each learning outcome. In each cell, place a letter to indicate how the course relates to the learning outcome. Use the letters I, R, E to designate which courses in the program introduce, reinforce or emphasize the corresponding learning outcomes. By completing the curriculum maps, you can check for unnecessary redundancy, inconsistencies, misalignments, weakness, and gaps in your learning outcomes. For example, the curriculum map below reveals that fourth learning outcome is not addressed by any of the courses in the engineering program. To correct for this, a course could be redesigned to include this outcome, or the outcome could be eliminated from the program. We recommend developing a curriculum map as a group exercise with your program faculty to facilitate faculty discussion about the program's learning priorities. The curriculum map will also illustrate how well your curriculum aligns with the specified outcomes. You can also use it to help design your assessment plan. For example, which courses you might sample students from and or administrator assessment. It will also provide a reference that may assist in interpreting assessment results later and in determining where you might take modifications in the curriculum. Now, group exercise to create learning outcomes. Here, step 1, start with a discussion describing what the perfect student graduating or passing out from your program should be able to demonstrate, represent or produce. Then step 2, have each faculty member write down 3 to 5 learning outcome statements and use the checklist located on to evaluate them. Conduct a panel discussion about your learning outcomes using a facilitator. Combine all criteria on to one list and have each member anonymously rank the outcomes as being very, somewhat, or not important. discuss the results with the faculty, and repeat the process until consensus is reached. Map learning outcome statements to courses in the program to ensure educational coherence using the matrix on the following page. This will ensure that every student in your program has sufficient opportunity to achieve every outcome. List your final set of learning outcomes and have faculty use the checklist to make any last changes. Now, what are learning outcomes? Think first about what is essential that the students know or be able to do after a particular course or program. What students need to know and could make powerful use of to enhance their lives and more effectively contribute to society. We believe that such reflection will lead instructors to focus on a broad synthesis of abilities that combine knowledge, skills, and values into a whole that reflects how people really use knowledge. Learning outcomes are statements that describe the knowledge or skills the students should acquire by the end of a particular assignment, class, course, or program, and help students understand why that knowledge and those skills will be useful to them. They focus on the context and potential applications of knowledge and skills. Help students connect learning help students connect learning in various contexts and help guide combine knowledge, skills, and values into a whole that reflects how people really use knowledge. Learning outcomes are statements that describe the knowledge or skills students should acquire by the end of a particular assignment, class, course, or program, and help students understand why that knowledge and those skills will be useful to them. They focus on the context and potential applications of knowledge and skills. Help students connect learning in various contexts and help guide assessment and evaluation. Good learning outcomes emphasize the application and integration of knowledge. Instead of focusing on coverage of material, learning outcomes articulate how students will be able to employ the material, both in context of the class and more broadly. Few examples of learning outcomes are: identify and describe the political, religious, economic, and social uses of art in Italy during the Renaissance. Identify a range of works of art and artists. Analyze the role of art and of artists in Italy this time. Analyze the art of period according to the objective methods. Link different materials and types of art to the attitudes and values of the period. Evaluate and defend their response to a range of art historical issues. Now, The next topic under this class is learning outcomes versus learning objectives. The distinction between learning outcomes and learning objectives is not universally recognized, and many instructors may find that the term learning outcomes describes what they have already understood by the term learning objectives. Some scholars make no distinction between the two terms. Those who do usually suggest that learning outcomes are a subset or type of learning objective. Learning objectives, for example, may outline the material the instructor intends to cover or the disciplinary questions the class will address. By contrast, learning outcomes should focus on what the student should know and realistically be able to do by the end of an assignment, activity, class, or course. The same goals addressed by learning objectives can be equally addressed by learning outcomes. But by focusing on the application and integration of the course content from the perspective of the student, learning outcomes can more explicitly and directly address expectations for student learning. Many instructors may find that the reflective process of developing learning outcomes is something that they have already incorporated into their course planning processes. The phrase learning outcomes just simply offers a more precise term for discussing the creation of learning aims and expectations that center on application and integration of course content. Now, by developing learning outcomes, students already know they want to do. They want to certificate. The challenge is to help students become highly intentional about the forms of learning and accomplishment that the certificate should represent. Learning outcomes are valuable to learners, instructors, as well as administrators. Learning Outcomes Network explains that learning outcomes are more than simply several sentences appended to existing lesson plans or curricula. Instead, the development of learning outcomes and their use within a unit of instruction shapes learning and assessment activities and can enhance student engagement and learning. Because of their ability to benefit many groups in post-secondary education, the development of learning outcomes has become an increasing priority for instructors and institutions over the course of the last decade, establishing a focus on integrated, generalizable, and transferable skills complements contemporary demands on graduates and builds a foundation for lifelong learning. As government and public attention on the products of higher education increases, learning outcomes help to define the goal and essential aspects of higher education within the institution to students and to the general public. For students, by focusing on the application of knowledge and skills learned in a course and on the integration of knowledge and skills with other areas of their lives, students are more connected to their learning and to the material of the course. The emphasis on integration and generalizable skills helps students draw connection between the courses and between coursework and other kinds of knowledge in enhancing student engagement. Students understand the conditions and goals of their assessment. For instructor, the process of developing learning outcomes itself offers an opportunity of reflection on the content of the course in the context of its potential applications. Developing learning outcomes means that the context of the learning will always be emphasized, and course focus on the knowledge and skills that will be more valuable to the student now and in the future. Learning outcomes point to useful methods of assessment. Learning outcomes allow instructors to set the standards by which the success of the course will be evaluated. For institutions and administrators, in order to determine what is essential for students to know, an instructor must consider the particular course or unit in the context of future coursework and the curriculum as a whole. This contributes to the development of a coherent curriculum within a decentralized institution while maintaining instructor autonomy and helps to ensure that students are prepared for future work and learning. The application and integration of learning emphasize the learning outcomes reflect and support the contemporary nature as well as priorities of the school, enhancing student engagement, uncovering opportunities for interdisciplinary and providing guidance and support for students with many different kinds of previous academic preparation. Learning outcomes provide structures from which courses and programs can be evaluated and can assist in program and curriculum design, identify gaps or overlap in the program office, and clarify instructional, programming, and institutional priorities. Now, there are few educational objectives addressing the levels of learning. Scholars working in pedagogy and epistemology offers us taxonomies of learning that can help making learning outcomes more precise. These levels of learning can also help develop assessment and evaluation methods appropriate to the learning outcomes of the course. Developing learning outcomes. For an alternative taxonomy, content, skills, values. These three areas can be used to identify and describe different aspects aspects of learning that might be observed or take place in a course. Content can be used to describe the disciplinary information covered in the course. This content might be vital to future work or learning in the areas. The learning outcome focused on the content might read skills can refer to the disciplinary or generalizable skills that students should be able to employ by the conclusion of the class. A learning outcome focused on skills might read, by the end of this course, students will be able to define the characteristics and limitations of historical research. Some learning outcomes might articulate desired values, attitudes, or beliefs that are imparted or investigated in the course of learning in a field or discipline. In particular, value-oriented learning outcomes might focus on ways that knowledge or skills gained in the course will enrich students' experience throughout their lives. A learning outcome focused on values might read, by the end of this course, students will be able to articulate their personal responses to a literary work they have selected independently. More guidance is needed to support effective program planning and tie the goals of individual programs to the overall degree objectives. Appropriate statements of learning objectives would help faculty with curriculum planning and ensure what our programs of study are coherent. Then context, collecting your outcomes. Learning outcomes help instructors and learners focus on the potential applications of the knowledge and skills gained in the course. In turn, this helps students perceive the value of their learning and helps instructors develop appropriate assessment tools. In developing learning outcomes, some questions that allow for reflection on the context of the learning taking place in the course might include: how does this course fit into the student's program or curriculum? If the course is part of the major or specialization, what knowledge or skills should students have coming into the course? What knowledge or skills must they have by its conclusion in order to proceed through their program? How can this course contribute to the students' broad learning and the students' understanding of other subjects or disciplines? What are the priorities of the department or faculty within which the course takes place? How does the particular focus of the course contribute to those broader goals? Does the course play a particular role within this? Does the course play a particular role within the student's program, introductory, elective, summative? How is the courses shaped by this role? Then, how does this course fit into the student's personal or professional future? What knowledge or skills gained in this course will serve students throughout their lives? How will the class shape the students' general understanding of the world? Which careers commonly stem from education in this field? What are the skills of knowledge essential to these careers? What kinds of work are produced in those careers? Where will the student encounter the subject matter of the course elsewhere in his or her life? In what situations might the knowledge or skills gained in the course be useful to the students? Now, there are few characteristics of good learning outcomes. Good learning outcomes focus on the application and integration of the knowledge and skills acquired in a particular unit of instruction, for example, activity, course program, etc., and emerge from a process of reflection on the essential contents of a course. More specifically, good learning outcomes are very specific and use active language and verbs in particular that make expectations clear. This informs students of the standards by which they will be assessed and ensures that student and instructor goals in the course are aligned. Where possible, avoid terms like understand, demonstrate, or discuss that can be interpreted in many ways. Should be flexible. While individual outcomes should be specific, instructors should feel comfortable adding, removing, or adjusting learning outcomes over the length of a course if initial outcomes prove to be inadequate. Are focused on the learner. Rather than explaining what the instructor will do in the course, good learning outcomes describe knowledge or skills that the student will employ and help the learner understand why that knowledge and those skills are useful and valuable to their personal, professional, and academic future. Are realistic, not aspirational. All passing students should be able to demonstrate the knowledge or skill described by the learning outcome at the conclusion of the course. In this way, learning outcomes establish standards for the course. Focus on the application and integration of acquired knowledge and skills. Good learning outcomes reflect and indicate the ways in which the described knowledge and skills may be used by the learner now and in the future. Indicate useful modes of assessment and the specific elements that will be assessed. Good learning outcomes prepare students for assessment and help them feel engaged in and empowered by the assessment and evaluation process. Offer a timeline for completion of the desired learning. Each assignment, activity, or course might usually employ between approximately 5 and 10 learning outcomes. This number allows the learning outcomes to cover a variety of knowledge and skills while retaining a focus on essential elements of the course. When writing your outcomes, keep in mind learning outcomes should be SMART. Speaker to learner. Learning outcomes should address what the learner will know or be able to do at the completion of the course. Then, Ms. Rebo. Learning outcomes must indicate how learning will be assessed. Then, A of SMART. Learning outcomes should emphasize ways in which the learning is likely to use the knowledge or skills gained. R of SMART. R apply for realistic. All learners who complete the activity or course satisfactorily should be able to demonstrate the knowledge or skills at rest in the outcome. Then G is for time bound. The learning outcome should set a deadline by which the knowledge or skills should be acquired. Again G for transparent, should be easily understood by learner. And last T is for transferable, that implies should assist knowledge and skills that will be used by the learner in a wide variety of contexts. Now, key to the outcomes approach to assessment is the use of authentic assessment. This approach stresses creating assignments and assessments that stimulate as much possible the situation in which the students would make use of the knowledge, skills and values emphasized in the
60 हो
course.
जाएगा ना मैम, 1 आवर हो
So,
जाएगा।
what's the last
मैम
outcome?
को ऐसे बोल दीजिएगा रुकने को, ठीक
Now,
ठीक है। उसके बाद इस बटन को स्टॉप कर देना।
through assessment, learning outcomes can become fully integrated in course
मैं करने
design
लेती हूँ
and
100 और
delivery. Because learning outcomes focus on the integration, application and integration of knowledge and skills learned, learning outcomes point to appropriate modes of assessment and ensure that assessment focuses on the essential knowledge or skills of the course. Assignments and exams should match the knowledge and skills described in the course's learning outcomes. A good learning outcome can readily be translated into an assignment or exam question. If it cannot, the learning outcome may not be defined. One way to match outcomes with appropriate modes of assessment is to return to Bloom's taxonomy of educational objectives, that is, the verbs associated with each level of learning indicate the complexity of the knowledge or skills that students should be asked to demonstrate in an assignment or exam question. An outcome, for example, that asks students to recall key moments leading up to an historical event might be assessed through multiple choice or short answer questions. By contrast, an outcome that asks students to evaluate several different policy models might be assessed through a debate or written essay. Through assessment, learning outcomes can become fully integrated in course, design and delivery. Because learning outcomes focus on the application and integration of knowledge as well as skills learned, learning outcomes point to appropriate modes of assessment and ensure that assessment focuses on the essential knowledge and skills of the course. Assignments and exams should match the knowledge and skills described in the course's learning outcomes. A good learning outcome can readily be translated into an assignment or exam questions. If it cannot, the learning outcome may need to be defined. Learning outcomes may also point to more conventional or unconventional modes of assessment. Because learning outcomes can connect students' learning with its application, both within and outside of an academic context, learning outcomes may point to modes of assessment that parallel the type of work that students may produce with the learned knowledge and skills in their career or later in life. Courses that require prerequisite sides may benefit from identifying a list of outcomes necessary for advancement from one level to another. So the main point is outcomes. Whatever students are learning, that will be the outcome, and that is the most crucial thing. So now I am going to wind up my class. Thank you so much.